Today I will be describing all the books I read this summer while I make my lunch. For lunch I'll be making a tomato or pyaj ki sabji, which is basically just tomatoes and onions grilled together. So the first book is The Guest List. The Guest List certainly brought out like some major Agatha Christie vibes. Like the book I've read by Agatha Christie, which was very similar to this, was And Then There Were None. Like, so many aspects are exactly the same. So I think the author kind of got a lot of inspiration from that book. But overall, there are different scenarios. There are a lot of more characters, kind of, in The Guest List. But Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None was certainly more compelling. Like, The Guest List kind of started out slow, and some things felt very unnecessary. Like, it was just information piled up on top of each other, like, endlessly. While and Then There Were None, it was just slow suspense, and you really had no idea what was going on. But in The Guest List, I mean, it was kind of predictable, even though sometimes it wasn't. It was sometimes. It honestly really was. But overall, it was a really good book to read, and I read it in, like, a short amount of time because, like, the first 1/3 was absolutely boring for me, but the last 2/3 were very, very good. Like, I couldn't stop reading. I couldn't put the book down. So The Guest List, yeah, if you're a fan of Agatha Christie or any, like, horror kind of mystery type with, like, a bunch of psychological stuff added in, then this book is certainly going to be just for you. The next book I read was actually for my AP Bio summer assignment, but it was overall really good, and this book I would recommend to anyone who has literally any interest in science. It is called Survival of the Sickest. It is primarily a very biology and evolutionary focused book. So basically the book attempts and does succeed in answering these questions that we have about, like, even though that natural selection and evolution exist, humans still have a lot of diseases that have been passed down for generations, and like, in certain populations, like, a very high percentage of people have them. So why is it that so many people can have one disease? Well, we know that natural selection basically kind of picks out the best phenotypes, the best characteristics, and those people survive more. So if these diseases are harming us today, why are they so prominent in a population? Like, shouldn't they have been removed when humans were dying and stuff? See, the book kind of explains how this happens. So the shortest response is that one time this disease helped our ancestors in the past. So one example the author gives is like an iron deficiency. And iron deficiency today is very harmful and requires a lot of treatment and careful, like, watching. But once having an iron deficiency helped people, like, it made them more likely to survive. And because it helped people to survive, this characteristic was passed down through many generations. And so that's why iron deficiencies are so prominent today, even though they don't help us. So basically, that's what the book is about. It's kind of like a scholarly article you're reading, but it's very fascinating and interesting if you actually pay close attention. Because there are so many, like, patterns and relationships brought up in the book. Like, reading the book, I feel, was really an incredible experience, and I'm happy that I read it. Next, we have a Colleen Hoover book. It Ends With Us. Not the best romance author of all time, and she is definitely overhyped. I read both It Ends With Us and Ugly Love this summer, so I'll just review them both at the same time. First of all, It Ends With Us was exponentially better than Ugly Love. First of all, Ugly Love has many faults. One being, I really did not enjoy how the relationship was portrayed. First, Tate, the female, was seen as, like, the angel, the savior. The author intentionally made her that way, as if she was saving Miles, her partner, from all his emotional trauma. I feel like this sends such the wrong message, like, men are always in the position that they need the female to come and save them. And while I am very glad that in the ending that Miles was like he was able to come to an acceptance. He was able to come to terms with what happened. I don't like how it's seen that he had to take all the blame for what happened, like the faults in the relationship, like as if they were all his fault. Because in all seriousness, they weren't. It was very explicitly clear in the beginning of their relationship, it was just going to be sex. But Tate developed really hard feelings, and they were so obvious. She tried to deny them, but when she told them to Miles and he backed off, she just persisted. And there were so many red flags that she should have noticed. And of course, it's not her fault, but I feel like there was just some tiny pressuring going on there, even if it wasn't very external. But yeah, I don't like this like angel messed up dude kind of trope thing. I don't know. I like the storyline. I guess I like the characters. I definitely liked Miles. I liked his story. I just feel like it could have been extended into something better in a sense. It ends with us, on the other hand, I really liked a lot more. One being, I was able to connect with the characters more, like Lily and Atlas and Ryle, and you can see why characters do what they do. And though some of their actions are definitely not excusable, the reader has sympathies for each character. And I really enjoyed the ending, where Lily gets her happy ending, where she understands her mistakes. But I feel like Lily becomes like a contradicting character, so it's kind of hard to understand her as a reader sometimes. But of course, it is a heavy book, kind of, and I'm not sure how it would be portrayed realistically, because I've never been in the situation that Lily has been. But overall, I think it was a good book. I would recommend It Ends With Us better than over Ugly Love. And now, the next book I read was My Dark Vanessa. Dark Vanessa is certainly a dark, realistic fiction book. I just love these type of books. It sounds weird that it's like trauma dumping, well, not trauma dumping books, but it's realistic books that talk about real people's trauma. So I feel like this book is really hard to describe because it was definitely difficult to read, but I am so glad I read it because it gave a lot of perspective. And let me explain why. My Dark Vanessa is about a female now who's in her 30s, and she was unknowingly groomed by, that's what grooming is. When someone is groomed, they have no idea what's happening. They think that they want it, that they love what's happening. They think they're in a love relationship. Someone looks out for them, cares for them, will treat them like they treat nobody else. And so Vanessa's teacher grooms her, and she's still in contact with him for years, and basically her whole life revolves around him. She hasn't been able to, pursue much of a career, and it's very possible for a reader to wonder, well, could something have been different in Vanessa's life had she had not been groomed? And so Vanessa, she doesn't know that she's been groomed, and throughout the whole book, it's basically she's denying that this ever happened to her, because I feel like subconsciously she can't even understand it. But then he dies, and then I feel like it gets kind of clearer for her. She talks to other people whom this teacher has, interacted with in an inappropriate, without consent manner. And it wasn't the same as the relationship Vanessa had with him. It was it feels bad to say it was not as bad, but that's kind of the only way to put it into words. Like Vanessa was in a complete relationship, doing everything a normal couple would do, and this went on for more than a decade. And then some allegations against him rose up, which came from other students, other girls, like a couple who were touched by him without their consent and in an inappropriate manner. My Dark Vanessa is about how Vanessa, as a teenager, she was always kind of lonely, and so when he's paid attention to her, it felt like she was in love, and so she believed that, and so eventually she didn't even have to believe it because she knew she was in love, and that's what she perceived it as. I mean, it's so difficult to understand exactly what happens, like the psychology behind it, because it's terrifying to think about, for one, how your brain kind of just switches up on you like that, makes you believe what you shouldn't, kind of, in a sense. But Vanessa, even though people in her life, some friends who witnessed what was happening, these friends knew it was wrong. She didn't listen because she believed they were wrong, and that's how the grooming went. She would always defend him, but I think at the end of the book she learned how to accept what happened to her didn't happen to everyone. And what happened to her didn't mean that she was exactly special. It meant that she was traumatized. And that's why she felt odd at times. I feel like I don't have really any right to even explain it, because I feel like I'm explaining it in such a bad manner. But my Dark Vanessa has a lot of trigger warnings, I would say, so read them before you think about, getting the book. But if you really want to see more perspectives on the issue of sexual assault and grooming, this would be a really good book to read. Just be careful, because some scenes are really hard to swallow. But overall, I am super glad I read the book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, so next we have a novel, kind of autobiography kind of book. It's called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. This book I got because a few of my friends from my school book club recommended it, and they were hyping it up so much, like, oh, it's wonderful, you have to read it, changed my life. I got new eyes reading this book, so I got the book. I mean, the cover itself makes you know it's sad. The book itself, first, the writing. The writing is super try hard. The author's trying so hard to be elegant and eloquent that it becomes incoherent. Like, all these metaphors jumbled up as if it's a miraculous poem. Obviously, I commend the author for having such a tremendous vocabulary and being able to write sentences like that, but you gotta understand, from a reader's perspective, it's not exactly what we want to read when reading such a book. But see, the thing about this is that it's an autobiography, right? This author is telling their own story, and so I feel like I feel it feels wrong just judging the book, because how am I to judge someone's story and the way they want to tell it? Okay, so from the books I have read, like this, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, there was another book I read, like My Chinese Cinderella. What I notice about these books is that often the authors, because of all this trauma they've endured, they tend to focus on casual trauma. Like, okay, they perceive the trauma they went through as something casual and something they just can mention. Like, something is no big deal, I'll just mention in my book, let's move on. So that can be very weird for a reader sometimes. But you gotta understand that sometimes that's how trauma is. Some things are so small, some things are so big. And so this author, exemplifies certain events in his life, while others aren't as overly, written out. Overall, I think the author did a good job explaining his story, even though I was confused for 50% of the time. I'm glad I read it. It wasn't as good as My Dark Vanessa. It wasn't as good as My Chinese Cinderella, but it was good overall. I'm glad I read it. I'm not sure what the author wanted us to learn from this, what the overall message is. Maybe that's my fault, my naivety, but I've read it. Oh my god, I've read it. I've read books similar to this, and those books were much better than this. But overall, if you're like a beginner and you can understand fancy writing, go ahead, read it. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, so the next book is Educated. Educated is a memoir, and I feel like this book was advertised or marketed in a certain way. So kind of what I was going to expect was that this character is completely secluded from the outside world. Her parents are like extremely strict, religious. She doesn't have much experiences in life. She doesn't have a large worldview. She doesn't really understand everything. Some of these things were true, but some of these things were not. So what I mean is that once I really read into the story, you can tell by this author's childhood that she wasn't as secluded as projected. She did go into the town nearby. She was near other kids. She was in stores, she was in theater, she went to church. But I feel like the main thing that caused Tara to have extreme trauma from her childhood were her parents. Her parents are extremely confusing and also sometimes really neglectful and ignorant. And so that's how I feel where most of her trauma came from. Not because of the fact that her parents were, really religious. Even though that was one of the main components, I don't think that was exactly it. It wasn't the fact that they were really religious. It wasn't the fact that they were isolated, because they weren't isolated that much, honestly. The parents had businesses and stuff. So that I don't think that's a perfect portrayal of isolation. So from her parents' way of parenting and the way they treated their child and dismissed the child at various points of her life, even through her adulthood. So that's how I feel this author got most of her trauma from her parents, not the way she was brought up, but her parents themselves. And because of her parents, then she had to experience difficult events, like seeing her brothers in pain, having to learn how to heal people, not getting an education. So one of the other main points is how she didn't get an education as a child. Her mother tried to educate her homeschooling, but that barely worked out. But I feel like it's not explained enough how she exactly succeeded in education, in academia, if she knew literally nothing by the age of 17. And I don't mean this in an offensive way. I'm genuinely curious because I don't feel like the author dwelled on this enough. And as I said, whenever someone writes about their trauma, they focus on some things, not other things. And that's how she wrote the book from her perspective, how she measured the things in importance and stress, whatever. But I feel like it wasn't exactly explained enough how she was able to even learn how to write so well, to become so kind of accomplished, because it starts at the very core, the very core subjects. How was she able to survive? Especially back then, there weren't a lot of computers. It was mainly just textbooks. So if this author really did just simply excel just the way she said, just studying, and she just succeeded, then I'm astounded. I think that's amazing. Good for the author. She's practically a genius. But as I said, these books can be marketed one way and can be read one way. And the author, of course, writes from their own personal experience. So the things you find extremely concerning, they might not. The things you find so important, they might not. but once again is up to interpretation. Overall, Educated was a good book. I am glad I read it. I feel like the most interesting part of it were her siblings in this, the role her siblings played, how each of them were different, how some made her more strong, some made her more, aware. But yeah, Educated, the more brilliant. Okay, I don't know if you can tell, but oh my god, my throat hurts so bad. I need water, like ASAP. Who enjoyed those unnecessary slurping noises? The next and the last book I read was A Slow Fire Burning. So, A Slow Fire Burning, I've been wanting to read this book for a while, but I don't know, it had bad ratings, but I read it anyway, because I think someone bought it for me as a gift. Yay, thanks, whoever did. Yeah, so the book is it's basically a fiction murder mystery, kind of. So basically, this young man is murdered, and the book just goes on about relating people who are not connected to his murder, but are possible suspects and are involved with people whom he knows or people he was connected with before, So basically it goes around telling that, so the book is kind of just a bunch of twists and turns, learning a lot about a few specific characters, and that's what's really interesting about the book. It just goes to show how so few people could be involved in such big thing. But yeah, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you did. Bye.